It was more than a week after the last case had been reported that David sat in his basement laboratory beside the open mouse cage, watching with wry affection as the furry creature crawled over his hand. These were historic mice, he reflected, whose reactions to the SDE had opened up a new world, a world which he must somehow help to make better than the present one. His 3 colleagues had returned a few days ago from their holiday. They had calmly come back to work, and apparently nobody had thought to put 2 and 2 together, and thus connect the epidemic with the vacationers. It had been unfortunate that Tanya should have been put under arrest. It was difficult trying to find amusement for Lee so that she would keep out of sight. But still, on the whole, their luck had been good. But it was time for David to go back to work in his office. Gently, he detached the mice from his hand, dropped them into their cage, and closed the wire trap. He took his leather pencil case and the keys to his desk from the pocket of his lab coat and laid them on the desk, below the nail on which his wristwatch hung. Carelessly, he dropped his lab coat onto the desk and reached for his jacket, then paused, listening. The chatter in the technician's room suddenly died. In the unnatural quiet sounded a steady march of feet. David turned to meet the probing black eyes of Leader Marley. Just behind him were Dr. Lanza and Officer Magnon. There was no time to conceal his mice, David realized. Shrugging into his jacket, he strode forward without hesitation, a smile on his face, and stretched out hand. Leader Marley, this is indeed an honor. If you had only notified us of your visit, we should have been prepared. Young as ever, I see, Wong. Thank you, Leader. There was no banter in Marley's eyes, he noted. But he continued amicably. It has been some years since you have honored us by a visit in person. I'm afraid a laboratory is not a very exciting place, but I'd be honored to show you anything that may be of interest to you. A faint contempt curled Marley's mouth as he glanced around the room. Nothing to see that I haven't seen before, is there? A lot of test tubes, a bunch of flasks, a mess of apparatus you'd think had been trumped up by an idiot, and a bad smell. You still keep animals, I notice. He sauntered over to the bench, picked up the cage, and looked at the scurrying rodents. David scarcely breathed. Marley only nodded. Well, mice are mice. He put down the cage and turned away. These looked just like the ones I saw when I was here 8 or 10 years ago. Same white patch on their forelimbs. I never knew mice could live that long. But, began Lanza, bending over to study the mice. What an amazing memory you have, Leader, said David. Just as you guessed, these mice are direct descendants of the ones you saw on your former visit. A special mutant strain. The chief difference is that these are marked with white patches on the right forelimbs, while, as I'm sure you recall, the original specimens were marked on their left forelimbs. Odd how these marks run in families, isn't it? Lanza put down the cage and strolled towards the door as Marley took a last bored look around. Nothing new here that I ought to see, Lanza. No, nothing new. Well, I've no time to waste. I've come here for 2 reasons, Dr. Wong. We both want a booster shot for Blue Martian. 10 years years is a long time, and there's been this epidemic, which is now under control. That may be, but I still want a booster. You research people don't always know as much as you think you do. When that's done, I want a detailed report on your progress on White Martian. And I shall be happy to give it, said David. If you will go directly into my office, I'll pick up the vaccine and syringes and be with you in minutes. Marley and Officer Magnan marched into the door, and David followed, standing aside to let Lanza precede him. Lanza hesitated there, staring at the floor. Then he smiled and looked directly at David. Beautiful spring weather we're having. I'm wondering about the marvelous order of nature. Did you happen to notice this morning whether the sun did actually rise in the east? David stared at the retreating back. There was no longer any doubt in his mind. Lanza knew. What was he going to do? Hurry up, Doctor, said Officer Magnan from the doorway. Right away, he opened the refrigerator and inspected the 2 groups of red-capped vials sitting on the shelf. He had no time to think. No time to weigh the pros and cons. He could only act. Choosing 2 vials, he added them to the sterile kit from the autoclave and took a last look around. He noticed his watch still hanging on the wall, and the lab coat which covered his leather pencil case. He started to take them, then slowly dropped his hand and touched the intercom. Give me Dr. Carl Haslam. You're keeping the leader waiting, said Magnan, but David paid no attention. Dr. Haslam, Dr. Wong speaking. I may be a little late getting up to see those precipitates of yours, but you keep them simmering, just in case. It's very probable that the antibody curve will rise. Yes, I'll let you know if I can. Magnan followed him to the office and strolled away for a chat with Watchguard Jones. David put his things on his desk and made his preparations in a business-like fashion, while Marley and Lanza glanced curiously around the office. He watched apprehensively as Marley inspected the bookcase, then turned away. I could never understand why research needs so many books, he remarked. Please roll up your sleeve, Leader Marley. I'm ready for you now. Deftly, he assembled a syringe, filled it to the 2-centimeter mark, and scrubbed the arm presented to him. Ready? He inserted the needle and slowly expelled the fluid. Then, taking a fresh syringe, he repeated the operation, filling from the second vial. Why do those bottles have different numbers? Asked Marley. Aren't we getting the same thing? Certainly. Just lab routine, so we can keep track of how many units have been used from our stock. There, that does it, Lanza. Both of you will be perfectly safe for a good many years to come. He was washing his hands at the sink when he heard a struggle at the door. Turning, he saw Lee, thin, gaunt, and terrified, held fast in the grip of Officer Magnan, who forced her inside and slammed the door behind them. What's the meaning of this intrusion? Demanded Marley. There's some funny business going on. Leader, said Magnan, I caught this woman trying to sneak in here. She says she's Miss Hatchnovic and works here. Only she ain't. I arrested Miss Hatchnovic myself and remembered well enough what she looked like. She was a cute chick, not a bit like this dame. Marley was staring at the sobbing girl, eyes blinking as he thought. Looked back remembered. Slowly, his eyes shifted to David, and David felt like a man impaled. "You may leave, Magnan," said the leader. "You don't want me to arrest this woman? Let go of her. I said you may leave. As you say, leader." When the door closed, the room throbbed to Lee's sobs. "I couldn't help it, Dr. Wong," she cried. "I got so bored, sitting and looking at all those books, day after day, with nothing to do. I thought I'd just slip down here for an hour and say hello to people and—" "Quiet, Hachnovik!" roared Marley. He quieted his voice. "I understand now, Wong. I remembered. There were 2 girls, twins. The one in psycho detention, according to Officer Magnan, is still beautiful and young. It's no use, Wong. You do know the secret of immortality, and you told me the Phoenix was only a fairy tale.